The independence movement in Mexico began just as it did in many other parts of the world. Fueled by perceived injustices and discrimination, and shaped by the ideals taught by Enlightenment thinkers such as John Locke and Voltaire, the Mexican independence movement was led by the criollos, who had long been unhappy with the way they were treated in New Spain. The heavy taxes and exclusion from high-ranking roles in the church, government, and military were more than enough to give them reason to revolt when Spain was at its weakest, following the Napoleonic invasion and consequent placement of a foreigner on the Spanish throne.
Hidalgo first joined a group of criollos Querétaro after being asked to join by his friend Ignacio Allende, who believed that Hidalgo's occupation as a priest would draw in more people to their movement. In December of 1810, the Querétaro group wanted to begin the uprising of their plot, to establish a junta in the viceroyalty. To their dismay, in September, 2 months before they planned to begin, the Spaniards were alerted of their plans and acted to stop it. Members of Querétaro were given the chance to either take up arms or give themselves up to the authorities. Hidalgo chose to take up arms, and his famous cry for help in this situation is known as El Grito. He encouraged all inhabitants of the capital of the viceroyalty to rise and fight against the bad government of Spain, and to become in favor of independence. Unfortunately, the ultimate reason why he did this was to gain power. The rest of the criollos supported Hidalgo in his movement at first, but withdrew their trust after hearing about the brutality of Hidalgo and his army. They were interested in obtaining political power, but were not interested in a violent manner. This did not stop Hidalgo, and he pressed on until he reached one last stop before taking over Mexico City, and for whatever reason he decided to retreat. Hidalgo was eventually tried and executed, ending the Hidalgo movement.
The movement of Morelos took place from 1811 to 1815. Jose Maria Morelos y Pavon took charge of the movement following the death of Hidalgo. He was a mestizo and took up the priesthood when he was 30 years old. Morelos was very aware of the injustices and backwardness suffered by the people. Morelos was a great military strategist, and in his initial campaign, he acted in the south of the country in what was known as the Great State of Guerrero. This was when the leader of the insurgent organized a small, well-run army led by such trusted officers as the Bravo and Galeana brothers. The second campaign was characterized by the political and military hegemony Morelos' army maintained in the central and southern parts of New Spain. The third campaign was important for several reasons. A large part of the southeast New Spain was under control of the insurgents, while Calleja was appointed to the viceroy to capture Morelos and put an end to his movement once and for all. Morelos created a congress in the town of Chilpancingo, which proclaimed the independence of New Spain. This was the first mention of independence. The last stage was one of contrast, because while the rebels made political progress, such as, for example, the Constitution of Apatzigan, the first campaign was from 1810 to 1811, the second from 1811 to 1812, the third from 1812 to 1813, but the last was from 1813 to 1815. The first three campaigns marked Morelos' successful stage. However, the fourth was that of defeat. In 1815, when Congress was fleeing from Calleja, its members, Morelos included, were captured, tried in court, and condemned to death. Morelos was executed by a firing squad at San Cristobal Ecatepec, near Mexico City, on December the 22nd, 1814.
In 1820, January 1st, Colonel Rafael de Riego and his troops rise against the king in Spain. This ploy has been under plotting for about 5 years, and during that time and before, there has been many attempts to overthrow the king. However, they all failed, but this time it was different. Riego was a liberal and also was in agreement with the concept of American independence. He wanted to put an end to the monarchy in Spain. The news of Riego's revolt spread across the Iberian Peninsula, and other liberals sharing the same ideals as him joined in on the effort. They were in favor of restoring the 1812 Constitution. Garrison of Madrid rebelled in March, and the monarch, Fernando, I think that's 7, gives up and accepts the proposed constitution. This means that the king has to share his power with the liberal, which was, they were the party or the group of people that won. And when this news reached New Spain, the elite, the criollos and the peninsulares thought of this as good news because they thought this new form of government would work towards their benefit and, work to better their rights within the area of New Spain. However, this new government or this new establishment in the actual country of Spain did not really act or perform the way that these people in New Spain would have wanted. And thus the criollos and the peninsulares decided that it was time for action towards independence. And a group of rebels met in La Profesa Church in Mexico City and agreed to make Agustin de Iturbide in charge. And this was because they knew that they had to have this central power, crucial, like this central leader in the rebellion in order to succeed. And Iturbide was a criollo. He was very passionate about the entire revolution idea, and he became very close with Vicente Guerrero. And Vicente Guerrero was I think he was another famous fighter for independence, and together they cemented a form of union, and they together they signed the Plan de Iguala, which was a document that established the basic principles for a future Mexico, if it became a thing. Iturbide constructed a dual campaign for this notion of Mexican independence. During the day, he used arms to fight against or oppose those who opposed him, and at night, he wrote letters to prominent figures. This included like bishops or politicians. While the viceroy initially did not support this revolutionary cause, after a shift in power, they got a new leader who was more like empathetic to the whole cause, and eventually they supported it. Finally, the Plan de Iguala was ratified, except the point regarding Mexicans and the emperor, and this was called the Treaty of Cordoba, and the insurgents made Mexico City, which affirmed their independence.
Following the death of Morelos, there was no insurgent strong enough to become the head of the movement for independence within Mexico. However, this situation was momentarily affected by the landing of Martin Javier Mina in 1817. Mina, a former Spanish soldier, fought against the French Napoleonic invasion, and by the age of 19 he was considered a war hero. However, despite this, he was taken prisoner by the French in 1810. He was released 4 years later in 1814. However, when he was released, the King of Spain, King Ferdinand, decided to relinquish his power in favor of a constitution. However, he decided to go back on this idea and instead begin to persecute the liberals who convinced him to make this idea in the first place. For this reason, to avoid death, Mina was forced to leave Spain in 1815. He ended up taking refuge in England and making contact with dissident exiles from New Spain in England. These exiles ended up persuading Mina to join the fight for the country's independence over his own country of Spain. In the year of 1816, Mina began to sail from England to Mexico. When he arrived in Mexico, his goal was to march from the city of Guanajuato to Mexico City in order to persuade the independence movement. However, none of his proposed ideas could be done, as on his journey to Guanajuato, Mina was taken as prisoner by Viceroy Juan Ruiz de Apodaca. Mina was eventually shot on trial on November 11, 1817. This was in order to prevent any further growth or spread of the movement. However, this information was soon leaked, and seeing how a Spaniard could fight for their own cause, the movement of independence was revived. However, the 2 years following Mina's death yielded really no significant changes.
The Mexican independence movement ended in 1821 with the ratification of the Treaty of Cordoba, and the Royalist troops in Mexico City surrendered on September 27, 1821. During the Viceroyalty, a total of 62 viceroys were sent to New Spain.